Section 32 of the House of the White Shadows. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The House of the White Shadows by B.L. Farjeon. Section 32. Book 7, Chapters 3 through 5. Chapter 3. Pauline. "I have no choice but to obey you," said Father Capel, "for time presses, and a life is hanging in the balance. I should have been here before, had it not been that my duty called me most awfully and suddenly to a man who has been smitten to death by the hand of God. The man you defended, Gautran, charged with the murder of an innocent girl, is dead. Of him I may not speak at present. Deathbed confessions are sacred, and apart from that, not even in the presence of your dearest friend can I say one further word concerning the sinner whose soul is now before its Creator. I came to you from a dying woman, who is known by the name of Pauline." Both Vanbrugh and the Advocate started at the mention of the name. "Fate is merciful," said the Advocate in a low tone. "Its blows are sharp and swift." "Before I left her, I promised to bring you to her to morrow," continued the priest. "But Providence, which directed me to Gautran in his dying moments, impels me to break that promise. She may die before to morrow, and she has that to say which vitally concerns you, and which you must hear, if she has strength enough to speak. I ask you to come with me to her without a moment's delay, through this storm, which has been sent as a visitation for human crime." "I am ready to accompany you," said the Advocate. "And I," said Vanbrugh. "No," said the priest, "only he and I. Who you are I do not seek to know, but you cannot accompany us." "Remain here," said the Advocate to Vanbrugh. "When I return I will hide nothing from you. Now, Father Capel." It was not possible for them to engage in conversation. The roaring of the wind prevented a word from being heard. For mutual safety they clasped hands and proceeded on their way. They encountered many dangers, but escaped them. Torrents of water poured down from the ranges. Great branches snapped from the trees and fell across their path. The valleys were in places knee deep in water, and occasionally they fancied they heard cries of human distress in the distance. If the priest had not been perfectly familiar with the locality, they would not have arrived at their destination, but he guided his companion through the storm, and they stood at length before the cottage in which Pauline lay. Father Capel lifted the latch, and pulled the Advocate after him into the room. There were but two apartments in the cottage. Pauline lay in the room at the back. In a corner of the room in which they found themselves a man lay asleep. His wife was sitting in a chair, watching and waiting. She rose wearily as the priest and the Advocate entered. "I am glad you have come, Father," she said. "She has been very restless, and once she gave a shriek, like a death shriek, which curdled my blood. She woke and frightened my child." She pointed to a baby girl, scarcely 18 months old, who was lying by her father with her eyes wide open. The child, startled by the entrance of strangers, ran to her mother, who took her on her lap, saying petulantly, "There, there, be quiet. The gentleman won't hurt you." "Is Pauline awake now?" asked Father Capel. The woman went to the inner room and returned. "She is sleeping," she said, "and is very quiet." Father Capel beckoned to the Advocate, who followed him to the bedside of the dying woman. She lay so still that the priest lowered his head to hers to ascertain whether she was breathing. "Life appears to be ebbing away," he whispered to the Advocate. She may die in her sleep." Quiet as she was, there was no peace in her face. An expression of exquisite suffering rested on it. The sign of suffering, denoting how sorely her heart had been wrung, caused the Advocate's lips to quiver. "It is I who have brought her to this," he thought. "But for me she would not be lying in a dying state before me." He was tortured not only by remorse, but by a terror of himself. Notwithstanding that so many years had passed since he last gazed upon her, she was not so much changed that he did not recognise in her the blooming peasant girl of Zermatt. Since then he had won honour and renown and the admiration and esteem of men. The best that life could offer was his, or had been his until the fatal day upon which he resolved to undertake the defence of Gautran. And now, how stood the account? He was the accomplice of the murderer of his own child. The mother of his child was dying and suffering. His wife was false to him. His one friend had betrayed him. The monument of greatness he had raised had crumbled away, and in a very little while the world would know him for what he was. His bitterest enemy could not have held him in deeper despisal than he held himself. "You recognise her?" said the priest. "Yes." "And her child, Madeline, was yours?" "I am fain to believe it," said the Advocate, "but the proof is not too clear." "The proof is there," said the priest, pointing to Pauline. "She has sworn it. Do you think, knowing that death's door is open for her to enter, knowing that her child, the only being she loved on earth, is waiting for her in the eternal land, that she would, by swearing falsely, and with no end in view that could possibly benefit herself, imperil the salvation of her soul? It is opposed to human reason." "It is. I am forced to believe what I would give my life to know was false." "Unhappy man, unhappy man!" said the priest, sinking on his knees. "I will pray for you, and for the woman whose life you blighted." The Advocate did not join the priest in prayer. His stern sense of justice restrained him. The punishment he had brought upon himself he would bear as best he might, and he would not inflict upon himself the shameful humiliation of striving to believe that, by prayers and tears, he could suddenly atone for a crime as terrible as that of which he was guilty. "Father Capel," he said, when the priest rose from his knees, "from what you have said, I gather that the man Gautran made confession to you before he died. I do not seek to know what that confession was, but with absolute certainty I can divine its nature. The man you saw in my study brought to me Gautran's dying declaration, signed by Gautran himself, which charges me with a crime so horrible that, were I guilty of it, laden as I am with the consequences of a sin which I do not repudiate, I should deserve the worst punishment. Are you aware of the existence of this document?" "I hear of its existence now for the first time," replied the priest. "When I left the bedside of this unhappy woman, and while I was wending my way home through the storm, I heard cries and screams for help on a hill near the House of White Shadows, as though two men were engaged in a deadly struggle. I proceeded in the direction of the conflict, and discovered only Gautran, who had been crushed to the earth by the falling of a tree, which had been split by the storm. He admitted that he and another man were fighting, and that the design was murder. I made search, both then and afterwards, for the other man, but did not succeed in finding him. I left Gautran for the purpose of obtaining assistance to extricate him, for the tree had fallen across his body, and he could not move. When I returned he was dead, and some gold which he had asked me to take from his pocket was gone, an indication that during my absence human hands had been busy about him. If Gautran's dying declaration be authentic, it must have been obtained while I was away to seek for assistance." "I can piece the circumstances," said the Advocate. "The man you saw in my study was the man who was engaged in the struggle with Gautran. It was he who obtained the confession, and he who stole the gold. In that confession I am charged with undertaking the defence of Gautran with the knowledge that he was guilty. It is not true. When I defended him I believed him to be innocent, and if he made a similar declaration to you, he has gone to his account with a black lie upon his soul. That will not clear me, I know, and I do not mention it to you for the purpose of exciting your pity for me. It is simply because it is just that you should hear my denial of the charge, and it is also just that you should hear something more. Up to the hour of Gautran's acquittal I believed him, degraded and vile as he was, to be innocent of the murder, but that night, as I was walking to the House of White Shadows, I met Gautran, who, in the darkness, supposing me to be a stranger, would have robbed me, and probably taken my life. I made myself known to him, and he, overcome with terror at the imaginary shadow of his victim which his remorse and ignorance had conjured up, voluntarily confessed to me that he was guilty. My error, call it by what strange name you will, dated from that moment. Knowing that the public voice was against me, I had not the honesty to take the right course. But if I," he added, with a gloomy recollection of his wife and friend, "had not by my own act rendered valueless the fruits of a life of earnest endeavour, it would have been done for me by those in whom I placed a sacred trust." For several hours Father Capel and the Advocate remained by the bedside of Pauline, who lay unconscious, as if indeed, as the priest had said, life was ebbing away in her sleep. The storm continued and increased in intensity, and had it not been that the little hut which sheltered them was protected by the position in which it stood, it would have been swept away by the wind. From time to time the peasant gave them particulars of the devastation created by the floods, which were rushing in torrents from every hill, but their duty chained them to the bedside of Pauline. An hour before noon she opened her eyes, and they rested upon the face of the Advocate. "You have come," she sighed. He knelt by the bed and addressed her, but it was with difficulty he caught the words she spoke. Death was very near. "Was Madeline my daughter?" he asked. "Yes," answered Pauline, "as I am about to appear before my God." The effort exhausted her, and she lay still for many minutes. Then her hand feebly sought her pillow, and the Advocate, perceiving that she wished to obtain something from under it, searched and found a small packet. He knew immediately, when she motioned that she desired him to retain it, that it contained the certificate of his daughter's birth. The priest prayed audibly for the departing soul. Pauline's lips moved. The Advocate placed his ear close. She breathed the words, "We shall meet again soon. Pray for forgiveness." Then death claimed her, and her earthly sorrows were ended. Chapter 4. Onward to Death. Late in the afternoon the Advocate was stumbling, almost blindly, through the tempest towards the House of White Shadows. Father Capel had striven in vain to dissuade him from making the attempt to reach the villa. "There is safety only in the sheltered heights," said the priest. "By this time the valleys are submerged, and the dwellings therein are being swept away. Ah me! Ah me! How many of my poor are ruined! How many dead! Not in my experience have I seen a storm as terrible as this. It is sent as a warning and a punishment. Only the strongest houses in the villages that lie in the valleys will be able to withstand its fury. Be persuaded, and remain here until its force is spent." He spoke to one who was deaf to reason. It seemed to the Advocate as though the end of his life had come, as though his hold upon the world might at any moment be sapped. But while he yet lived, there was before him a task which it was incumbent upon him to perform. It was imperative that he should have speech with his wife and Christian Almer. "I have work to do," he said to the priest, "and it must be done to day." An unaccustomed note in his voice caused Father Capel to regard him with even a more serious attention than he had hitherto bestowed upon him. "There are men," said the priest, "who, when sudden misfortune overtakes them, adopt a desperate expedient to put an end to all worldly trouble, and thus add sin to sin." "Have no fear for me," said the Advocate. "I am not contemplating suicide. What fate has in store for me I will meet without repining. You caution me against the storm, yet I perceive you yourself are preparing to face it." "I go to my duty," said the priest. "And I to mine," rejoined the Advocate. Thus they parted, each going his separate way. The Advocate had not calculated the difficulties he was to encounter. His progress was slow, and he had to make wide detours on the road, and frequently to retrace his steps for a considerable distance, in order to escape being swept to death by the floods. From the ranges all around the village in which the House of White Shadows was situated the water was pouring in torrents, which swirled furiously through the lower heights, carrying almost certain destruction to those who had not already availed themselves of the chances of escape. Terrific as was the tempest, he took no heed of it. It was not the storm of nature, but the storm within his soul which absorbed him. He met villagers on the road flying for safety. With terror-struck movements they hurried past, men, women, and children, uttering cries of alarm at the visitation. Now and then one and another called upon him to turn back. "If you proceed," they said, "you will be engulfed in the rapids. Turn back if you wish to live." He did not answer them, but doggedly pursued his way. "My punishment has come," he thought. "I have no wish to live, nor do I desire to outlast this day." Once only, of his own prompting, did he pause. A woman, with little children clinging to her, passed him, sobbing bitterly. His eyes happening to light upon her face, he saw in it some likeness to the peasant girl whom, in years gone by, he had betrayed. The likeness might or might not have been there, but it existed certainly in his fancy. He stopped and questioned her, and learned that she had been utterly ruined by the storm, her cottage destroyed, her small savings lost, and all her hopes blasted. He emptied his pockets of money, and gave her what valuables he had about him. "Sell them," he said. "They will help to purchase you a new home." She called down blessings on his head. "If she knew me for what I am," he muttered as he left her, "she would curse me." On and on he struggled and seemed to make no progress. The afternoon was waning, and the clouds were growing blacker and thicker when he saw a man staggering towards him. He was about to put a question to him regarding the locality of the House of White Shadows. His course had been so devious that he scarcely knew in what direction it lay, when a closer approach to the man showed him to be no other than John Vanbrugh. "Ah!" cried Vanbrugh, seizing the Advocate's arm, and thus arresting his steps, "I feared we had lost you. A fine time I have had of it down in your villa yonder. Had it not been for the storm, I should have been bundled before a magistrate on a charge of interloping. But everybody had enough to do to look after himself. It was a case of the devil take the hindmost. A scurvy trick, though, of yours, to desert a comrade. Still, for my sake, I am glad to see you in the land of the living." "Have you come straight from the villa?" asked the Advocate. "Straight!" cried Vanbrugh with a derisive laugh. "I defy the soberest saint to walk straight for 50 yards in such a hurricane. 3 bottles of wine would not make me so unsteady as this cursed wind, enough to stop one's breath for good or ill. What, are you not going on?" "I am. What should hinder me?" "Some small love of life, a trivial but human sentiment. There is no one in your house. It is by this time deserted by all but the rats." "My wife—" "Was the last to leave, with a friend of yours, Christian Almer by name. He and I had some words together. Let me tell you. I happened to drop a remark concerning you which he considered disparaging, and had I been guilty of all the cardinal sins, he could not have been more angered. A true friend, but probably he does not know what I know. Well for you that I did not enlighten him. You will meet them a little lower down on the road, but I advise you not to go too far. The valleys are rivers, carrying everything headlong in their course. There was an old lawyer in the house. Do you know what has become of him?" "I saw him perched on the back of a fool, and by their side a girl with the sweetest face, and an old woman I should take to be her grandmother." "Farewell," said the Advocate, wrenching himself free. "Should we meet again, I will pay you for your friendly services." "Well said," replied Vanbrugh. "I am content. No man ever knew you to be false to your word. A woman, perhaps, but that lies in the past. Ah, what a storm! It is as though the end of the world has come." "To those whose minutes are numbered," said the Advocate between his set teeth, "the end of the world has come. Farewell once more." "Farewell, then," cried Vanbrugh, proceeding onward. "For my sake, be careful of yourself. If this be not the second deluge, I will seek you to morrow." "For me," muttered the Advocate as he left Vanbrugh, "there may be no to morrow." Bearing in mind the words of Vanbrugh that he would meet his wife and Christian Almer lower down on the road, he looked out for them. He saw no trace of them, and presently he began to blunder in his course. He searched in vain for a familiar landmark, and he knew not in which direction the House of White Shadows was situated. Evening was fast approaching when he heard himself hailed by loud shouts. The sounds proceeded from a strongly built stone hut, protected on 3 sides from wind and rain, and so placed that the water from the ranges rolled past without injuring it. Standing within the doorway was Fritz the Fool. Thinking his wife might have sought shelter there, the Advocate made his way to it, and found therein assembled, in addition to Fritz, old Pierre Lamont, Mother Denise, and her husband Martin, and their pretty granddaughter Dionetta. "Welcome, comrade, welcome!" cried Pierre Lamont. "It is pleasant to see a familiar face. We were compelled to fly from the villa, and Fritz here conveyed us here to this hospitable hut, where we shall be compelled to stay till the storm ceases. Where is your fair lady?" "It is a question I would ask of you," said the Advocate. "She is not here, then?" "No. She left the villa before we did, in the company of your friend." The slight, involuntary accent he placed upon the word caused the Advocate to start as though he had received a blow. "Christian Almer. They have doubtless found another shelter as secure as this. We wished them to stop for us, but they preferred not to wait. Fritz had a hard job of it carrying me to this hut, which he claims as his own, and which is stored with provisions sufficient for a month's siege. I have robbed the old house of its servants. Dionetta here, for whom," he dropped his voice, "the fool has a fancy, and her grandmother, whom I shall pension off, and Fritz himself, an invaluable fool. Fritz, open a bottle of wine. Do the honours of your mansion. The Advocate is exhausted." The Advocate did not refuse the wine. He felt its need to sustain his strength for the work he had yet to perform. He glanced round the walls. "Is there an inner room?" he asked. "Yes, there is the door." "May I crave privacy for a few minutes?" Pierre Lamont waved his hand, and the Advocate walked to the inner room, and closed the door upon himself. "What has come over this man?" mused Pierre Lamont. "There is in his face, since yesterday, such a change as it is rare in life's experience to see. It is not produced by fatigue. He has made discovery of his wife's faithfulness and his friend's treachery. And should I not behave honestly to him, and make him as wise as I am on events within my knowledge? What use? What use? But at least he shall know that the secret of Gautran's guilt is not his alone." In the meantime the Advocate was taking advantage of the solitude for which he had been yearning since he left the bedside of Pauline. It was not until this moment that he could find an opportunity to examine the packet she had given him. It contained what he imagined, the certificate of the birth of his child. He read it, and mentally took note of the date, and also of certain words written on the back, in confirmation of the story related to him by John Vanbrugh. No room was there for doubt. Madeline was his child, and by his means her murderer had escaped from justice. "A just Heaven smote him down," he thought. "So should retribution fall upon me. I am partner in his crime. Upon my soul lies guilt heavier than his." Within the certificate of birth was a smaller packet, which he had laid aside. He took it up now, and removed the paper covering. It was the portrait of his daughter, Madeline the flower girl. The picture was that of a young girl just budding into womanhood, a girl whose laughing mouth and sparkling eyes conveyed to his heart so keen a torture that he gave utterance to a groan, and covered his eyes with his hand to shut out the reproach. But in the darkness he saw a vision which sent violent shudders through him, such a vision as had pursued Gautran in the lonely woods, as he had seen the waving of branch and leaf, as had hovered over him in his prison cell, as he stood by his side in the court house during the trial from which he emerged a free man. Bitterly was this man, who had reached a height so lofty that it seemed as if calumny could not touch him, bitterly was he expiating the error of his youth. He folded the portrait of his child within the certificate of birth, and replaced them in his pocket. Then, with an effort, he succeeded in summoning some kind of composure to his features, and the next minute he rejoined Pierre Lamont. "You will remain with me," said the old lawyer. "It will be best." "Nay," responded the Advocate, A plain duty lies before me. I must seek my wife." "She herself is doubtless in a place of shelter," said Pierre Lamont, "and while this tempest is raging, devastating the land in every direction, you can scarcely hope to find her." "I shall find her," said the Advocate in a tone of conviction. "Stern fate, which has dogged my steps since I arrived in Geneva, and brought me to a pass which, were you acquainted with the details, would appear incredible to you, will conduct me to her side. Were I otherwise convinced, I must not shrink from my duty." "Outside these walls," urged Pierre Lamont, "death stares you in the face." "There are worse things than death," said the Advocate, with an air of gloomy and invincible resolution. "Useless to argue with such a man as yourself," said Pierre Lamont. He turned to Fritz. "Go, you and your friends, into the inner room for a while. I wish to speak in private with my friend." "One moment," said the Advocate to the fool as he was preparing to obey Pierre Lamont. "You were the last to leave the House of White Shadows?" "We were the last humans," replied Fritz. "In what condition was it at the time?" "In a most perilous condition. The waters were rising around the walls. It had, I should say, not 12 hours to live." "To live!" echoed Pierre Lamont, striving to impart lightness to his voice, and signally failing. "How do you apply that, Fritz?" "Trees live," replied Fritz, "and their life goes with the houses they help to build. If the walls of the old house we have run from could talk, mysteries would be brought to light." "You have been my wife's maid," said the Advocate to Dionetta, as she was about to pass him. Dionetta curtsied. "Has she discharged you?" Dionetta cast a nervous glance at Pierre Lamont, and another at Mother Denise. The old grandmother answered for her. "I thought it as well," said Mother Denise, "in all respect and humility, that so simple a child as Dionetta should be kept to her simple life. My lady was good enough to give Dionetta a pair of diamond earrings and a diamond finger ring, which we have left behind us." Fritz made a grimace. "These things are not fit for poor peasants, and the pleasure they convey is a dangerous pleasure." "You are not favourably disposed towards my wife," said the Advocate. Mother Denise was silent. "But you are right in what you say. Diamonds are not fit gifts for simple maids. I wish you well, you and your grandchild. It might have been—" The thought of his own child, of the same age as Dionetta, and as beautiful, crossed his mind. He brushed his hands across his eyes, and when he looked round the room again, he and Pierre Lamont were alone. "A fool of fools," said Pierre Lamont, looking after Fritz. "If he and the pretty Dionetta wed, it will be a suitable match for beauty to mate with folly. He will be father to a family of fools, who may, in their way, be wiser in their generation than you and I. Your decision is irrevocable?" "It is irrevocable." "If you do not find your wife, you will endeavour to return to us?" "I shall find her." "And then?" asked Pierre Lamont with a singular puckering of his brows. "And then?" echoed the Advocate absently, and added, "Who can tell what may happen from one hour to another?" "How much does he know?" thought Pierre Lamont. "Or are his suspicions but just aroused? There is a weight upon his soul which taxes all his strength. It is grand to see a strong man suffer as he is suffering. Is there a mystery in his trouble with which I am not acquainted? His wife, I know about her. Gautran, I know about him. But the stranger he left in his study in the middle of the night, a broken down gentleman, vagabond, with a spice of wickedness in him, who is he, and what was his mission? Of one thing I must satisfy myself before I am assured that he is worthy of my compassion." Then he spoke aloud. "You said just now there are worse things than death." "Aye." "Disgrace?" "In a certain form that may be borne, and life yet be worth the having." "Good. Dishonour?" "It matters little," said the Advocate. "But were the crimes not precious, I should be curious to learn why you desire to get at the heart of my secrets." "The argument would be too long," said Pierre Lamont with earnestness. "But I can justify myself. There are worse things than death. Pardon me, an older man than yourself, and one who is well disposed towards you, for asking you bluntly whether such things have come to you." "They have. You can read the signs in my face." "But if you have a secret, the revealing of which would be hurtful to you, cannot the mischief be averted? As far as I can expect, you have been frank with me. Frankness for frankness. Say that the secret refers to Gautran and to your defence of him." "I have been living in a fool's paradise," said the Advocate with a scornful smile. "To whom is this known?" "To Fritz the Fool, and to me through him. He saw Gautran in your study after the trial." "Have I been watched?" "The discovery was accidental. He was moved by some love verses I read to him, and becoming sentimental, he dallied outside Dionetta's window, after the manner of foolish lovers. Then the lights of your study window attracted him, and he peeped through. When Gautran left the villa, Fritz followed him, and heard him in his terrified soliloquies proclaim his guilt. Were this to go out to the world, it would, according to its fashion, construe it in a manner which might be fatal to you. But Gautran is dead, and I can be silent, and can put a lock on Fritz's tongue, for in my soul I believe you were not aware the wretch was guilty when you defended him." "I thank you. I believed him to be innocent." "Why, then, my mind is easy. Friend, shake hands." He held the Advocate's hand in his thin fingers, and with something of wistfulness said: "I would give a year of my life if I could prevail upon you to remain with us." "You cannot prevail upon me. So much being said between us, more is necessary. The avowal of my ignorance of Gautran's guilt at the time I defended him I learnt it after the trial, mind you will not avail me. A written confession, sworn upon his dying oath, exists, which accuses me of that which the world will be ready to believe. Strange to say, this is my lightest trouble. There are others of graver moment which more vitally concern me, unknown to you, unless indeed you possess a wizard's art of divination." "Comrade," said Pierre Lamont, slowly and with emphasis, "there breathes not in the world a woman worth the breaking of a man's heart." "Stop!" cried the Advocate in a voice of agony. In silence he and Pierre Lamont gazed upon each other, and in the old lawyer's face the Advocate saw that his wife's faithlessness and his friend's treachery were known. "Enough," he said. "There is for me no deeper shame, no deeper dishonour." And he turned abruptly from Pierre Lamont, and left the hut staggering like a drunken man. "Fritz! Fritz!" cried Pierre Lamont. "Come quickly!" Fritz instantly made his appearance from the inner room. "Look you, Fritz," said the old lawyer in hurried, excited tones, "the Advocate has gone upon his mad errand, has gone alone. After him at once, and if you can save him from the consequences of his desperate resolve, if you can advise, assist him, do so for my sake. Quick, Fritz, quick!" "Master Lamont," said Fritz, "are you asking me to do a man's work?" "Yes, Fritz. You can do no more." "Well and good. As far as a man dare go, I will go, but if a madman persists in rushing upon certain death, it will not help him for a fool to follow his example. I am fond of life, Master Lamont, doubly fond of it just now, for reasons." He jerked his thumb over his shoulder to the room which contained Dionetta. "But I will do what can be done. You may depend upon me." He was gone at least 2 hours, and when he returned he was exhausted and panting for breath. "I was never born to be drowned," he said, and he threw himself into a chair and sat there gasping. "Well, Fritz, well?" cried Pierre Lamont. "Wait till I get my breath. I followed this great Advocate as you desired, and for some time so deep was he in his dreams he did not know I was with him. But once, when he was waist high in water, not that he cared, it was as though he was inviting death, and I, who was acquainted with the road through which he was wading, pulled him suddenly back and so saved his life, he turned upon me savagely and demanded who I was. He recognised me the moment he spoke the words. I will say this of him, that in the presence of another man he never loses his self possession, and that, in my belief, he would be a match for death if it presented itself to him in a visible, palpable shape. "Ah," said he, "you are Fritz the Fool. Why do you dog me?" "I do not dog you," I replied. "Master Lamont bade me guide and assist you, if you needed guidance and assistance. He is the only man for whom I would risk my life." "Honesty is a rare virtue," he said. "Keep with me, then, for just as long as you think yourself to be safe. You saw my wife and Mr. Almer leave the House of White Shadows. Is it likely they took this road?" "They could take no other and live," I said. "But there is no trace of them. They must have turned back to the villa." "Could they reach it, do you think?" he asked. "A brave man can do wonders," I replied. "Some hours ago they may have reached it. But they could not stop in the lower rooms, which even at that time must have been below water mark. I will not answer for the upper part of the house at this moment, and before morning it will be swept away. Guide me as far on the roads as you care to accompany me," said he, "and when you leave me, point me out the way I should go." I did so, and we encountered dangers, and but for me he would not have been alive when I left him. We came to the bridge which spans the ravine of pines, 2 miles this side of the House of White Shadows. A great part of it had been torn away, and down below a torrent was rushing fierce enough to beat the life out of any living being, human or animal. "There is no other way but this," I said, "to the House of White Shadows. I shall not cross the bridge." He said no word, but struggled on to the bridge, which, all that was left of it, consisted of 3 slender trunks half hanging over the ravine. It was nothing short of a miracle that he got across. No sooner was he upon the other side than the remaining portion of the bridge fell into the ravine. He waved his hand to me, and I soon lost sight of him in the darkness. I stumbled here as well as I could. Master Lamont, I never want another journey such as that. Had not the saints watched over me, I should not be here to tell the tale. This is the blackest night in my remembrance." "Do you think he can escape, Fritz?" asked Pierre Lamont. "His life is not worth a straw," replied Fritz. "Look you here, Master Lamont. If I were to see him to morrow, or any other day, alive, I should know that he is in league with the Evil One. No human power can save him." "Peace be with him," said Pierre Lamont. "A great man is lost to us. A noble mind has gone." "Master Lamont," said Fritz sententiously, "there is such a thing as being too clever. Better to be a simpleton than to be over wise or over confident. I intend to remain a fool to the end of my days. I have no pity for such a man. Who climbs must risk the fall. Not rocky peaks, but level ground, with bits of soft moss for Fritz the Fool." He slept well and soundly, but Pierre Lamont tossed about the whole of the night, thinking with sadness and regret upon the downfall of the Advocate. CHAPTER V. THE DOOM of the House of White Shadows. An unerring instinct guided him, a superhuman power possessed him, and at midnight, though he could keep no count of time, he found himself within the gates of the House of White Shadows. Upon his lips, contracted and spasmodic with pain and suffering, appeared a pitiable smile as he gazed at the window on the upper floor and saw a light. It was reflected from the window of Christian Almer's room. "There they are," he muttered. "I shall not die unavenged." The water was breast high. He battled through it and reached the open door of the villa. Slowly he ascended the stairs until he arrived at the landing above. He listened at Christian Almer's door, but heard no sound. Enraged at the thought that they might, after all, have escaped him, he dashed into the room and called out the names of his wife and friend. Silence answered him. He staggered towards the lamp, which stood on a table covered with a shade which threw the light downward. Before the lamp was a sheet of paper, with writing upon it, and bending over it the Advocate saw that it was addressed to him, and was intended for his perusal. A steadier survey of the room brought its revelations. At the extreme end of the apartment lay a woman, still and motionless. He crept towards her, knelt by her, and lowered his face to hers. It was his wife, cold and dead. A rosy tint was in her cheeks, a smile was on her lips. Her death had brought no suffering with it. "Fair and false," he said. "Beauty is a sinful possession." Her clothes were wet, and he knew that she had been drowned. Then, turning, he saw what had before escaped his notice, the body of Christian Almer lying near the table. He put his ear to Almer's heart, and felt a slight beating. "He can wait," muttered the Advocate. "I will first read what he has written." He was about to sit at the table when he heard a surging sound without. He stepped into the passage, and saw the waters swaying beneath him. "It is well," he thought. "In a little while all will be over for those who have sinned." This reflection softened him somewhat toward those who lay within the room, and by whom he believed himself to have been wronged. Was he not himself the greatest sinner in that fatal house? he returned to the table and read what Christian Almer had written. Edward, I pray that these words may reach your eyes. Above all things on earth have I valued your friendship, and my heart is wrung with anguish by the reproach that I have not been worthy of it. Last night, when your wife and I parted, I knew that you had discovered the weak and treacherous part I have played towards you, for as I turned towards my room, at that very moment, looking downward, I saw you below. I did not dare to come to you, I did not dare to show my face to the man I had wronged. It was my intention to fly this morning from your presence and hers, and never to see you more, and also to write you the words to which, by the memory of all that I hold sacred, I now solemnly swear, that the wrong I have done you is compassed by sentiment. I do not seek to excuse myself. I know that treachery in thought is as base between you and me as treachery in act. Yet in all humbleness I implore you to endeavour to find some palliation, though but the slightest, of my conduct in the reflection that sometimes in the strongest men, even in such a man as yourself, whose mind and life are most pure and noble, error cannot be avoided. We are hurried into wrong by subtle forces which wither one's earnest endeavours to step in the right path. Thus it has been with me. If you will recall certain words which were spoken in our conversation at midnight, in the room in which this is written, you will understand what was meant when I said that I flew to the mountains to rid myself, by a happy chance, of a terror which possessed me. You who have never erred, you who have never sinned, may not be able to find it in your heart to forgive me. If it be so, I bow my head to your judgment, which is just, as in all your actions you are known to be. But if you cannot forgive me, I entreat you to pity me. You were not in the house to day, when we endeavoured to escape to a place of shelter in which we should be protected from this terrible inundation. We did not succeed, we were beaten back, and being engulfed in a sudden rush of waters, I could not save your wife. The utmost I could do was to bear her lifeless body back to this fatal house. It was I who should have died, not she. But my last moments are approaching. Think kindly of her if you can. Christian Almer. Had he not been absorbed, not only in the last words written by Christian Almer, but by the reflections which they engendered, the Advocate would have known that the floods were increasing in volume, and that, in the short time he had been in the house, the waters had risen several feet. But he was living an inner life, a life in which the spiritual part of himself was dominant. He stepped to the body of his wife and said, "Poor child! Mine the error." Then he knelt by the side of Christian Almer and raised him in his arms. Aroused to consciousness by the action, Almer opened his eyes. They rested upon the Advocate's face vacantly, but presently they dilated in terror. "Be not afraid," said the Advocate. "I have read what you have written. I know all." "I am very weak," murmured Christian Almer. "Do not torture me. Say that you pity me." "I pity and forgive you, Christian," replied the Advocate in a very gentle voice. "Thank God, thank God," said Almer, and closed his eyes, from which the warm tears gushed. "God be merciful to sinners," murmured the Advocate. When daylight broke, the House of White Shadows, and all that it contained, had been swept from the face of the earth. A bare waste was all that remained to mark the record of human love and human ambition. THE END. End of Book 7. End of The House of the White Shadows. End of Section 32.